13th Conference of the R.C.P. by Joseph Stalin, the 16th to 18th of January 1924. I. Report on immediate tasks in party affairs. January 17th. Comrades, it is customary for our speakers at discussion meetings to begin with the history of the question, how the issue of inter-party democracy arose, who was the first to say A, who followed by saying B, and so on. This method, I think, is not suitable for us, for it introduces an element of squabbling and mutual recrimination and leads to no useful results. I think that it will be much better to begin with the question of how the party reacted to the Political Bureau resolution on democracy II that was subsequently confirmed by the CC plenum. I must place on record that this resolution is the only one, I believe, in the whole history of our party to have received the full, I would say the absolutely unanimous, approval of the entire party, following a vehement discussion on the question of democracy. Even the opposition organizations and units, whose general attitude has been one of hostility to the party majority in the CC, even they, for all their desire to find fault, have not found occasion or grounds for doing so. Usually in their resolutions these organizations and units, while acknowledging the correctness of the basic provisions of the Political Bureau resolution on inter-party democracy, have attempted to distinguish themselves in some way from the other party organizations by adding some sort of appendage to it. For example, yes, yours is a very good resolution, but it don't offend Trotsky, or, your resolution is quite correct, but you are a little late, it would have been better to have done all this earlier. I shall not go into the question here of who is offending whom. I think that if we look into the matter properly, we may well find that the celebrated remark about tit-titich fits Trotsky fairly well, who would offend you, tit-titich? You yourself will offend everyone. Laughter, but as I have said, I shall not go into this question. I am even prepared to concede that someone really is offending Trotsky. But, is that the point? What principles are involved in this question of offense? After all, it is a question of the principles of the resolution, not of who has offended whom. By this I want to say that even units and organizations that are open and sharp in their opposition, even they have not had the hardihood to raise any objections in principle to the resolution of the Political Bureau of the CC and Presidium of the Central Control Commission. I record this fact in order to note once more that it would be hard to find in the whole history of our party another such instance of a resolution which, after the trials and tribulations of a vehement discussion, has met with such unanimous approval, and not only of the majority, but virtually of the entire party membership. I draw two conclusions from this. The first is that the resolution of the Political Bureau and CCC fully accords with the needs and requirements of the party at the present time. The second is that the party will emerge from this discussion on inter-party democracy stronger and more united. This conclusion is, one might say, a well-aimed thrust at those of our ill-wishers abroad who have long been rubbing their hands in glee over our discussion, in the belief that our party would be weakened as a result of it, and Soviet power disintegrated. I shall not dwell on the essence of inter-party democracy. Its fundamentals have been set forth in the resolution, and the resolution has been discussed from A to Z by the entire party. Why should I go over the same ground here? I shall only say one thing, evidently there will not be all-embracing, full democracy. What we shall have, evidently, will be democracy within the bounds outlined by the 10th, 11th and 12th Congresses. You know very well what these bounds are and I shall not repeat them here. Nor shall I dilate on the point that the principal guarantee that inter-party democracy becomes part of the flesh and blood of our party is to strengthen the activity and understanding of the party masses. This, too, is dealt with fairly extensively in our resolution. I pass to the subject of how some comrades among us, and some organizations, make a fetish of democracy, regarding it as something absolute, without relation to time or space. What I want to point out is that democracy is not something constant for all times and conditions, for there are times when its implementation is neither possible nor advisable. Two conditions, or two groups of conditions, internal and external, are required to make inter-party democracy possible. Without them it is vain to speak of democracy. It is necessary, firstly, that industry should develop, that there should be no deterioration in the material conditions of the working class, that the working class increase numerically, that its cultural standards advance, and that it advance qualitatively as well. It is necessary that the party, as the vanguard of the working class, should likewise advance, above all qualitatively, and above all through recruitment among the country's proletarian elements. These conditions of an internal nature are absolutely essential if we are to pose the question of genuine, and not merely paper, implementation of inter-party democracy. But these conditions alone are not enough. I have already said that there is another group of conditions, of an external nature, and in the absence of these democracy in the party is impossible. I have in mind certain international conditions that would more or less ensure peace and peaceful development, without which democracy in the party is inconceivable. In other words, if we are attacked and have to defend the country with arms in hand, there can be no question of democracy, for it will have to be suspended. The party mobilizes, we shall probably have to militarize it, and the question of inter-party democracy will disappear of itself. That is why I believe that democracy must be regarded as dependent on conditions, that there must be no fetishism in questions of inter-party democracy, for its implementation, as you see, depends on the specific conditions of time and place at each given moment. To obviate undesirable infatuation and unfounded accusations in future, I must also remind you of the obstacles confronting the party in the exercise of democracy. Obstacles which hinder the implementation of democracy even when the two basic favorable conditions outlined above, internal and external, obtain. Comrades, these obstacles exist, they profoundly influence our party's activities, and I have no right to pass them over in silence. What are these obstacles? These obstacles, comrades, consist, firstly, in the fact that in the minds of a section of our party functionaries there still persist survivals of the old, war period, when the party was militarized. And these survivals engender certain un-Marxist views, that our party is not an independently acting organism, independent in its ideological and practical activities, but something in the nature of a system of institutions, lower, intermediate and higher. This absolutely un-Marxist view has nowhere, it is true, been given final form and has nowhere been expressed definitely, but elements of it exist among a section of our party functionaries and deter them from the consistent implementation of inter-party democracy. That is why the struggle against such views, the struggle against survivals of the war period, both at the center and in the localities, is an immediate task of the party. The second obstacle to the implementation of democracy in the party is the pressure of the bureaucratic state apparatus on the party apparatus, on our party workers. The pressure of this unwieldy apparatus on our party workers is not always noticeable, not always does it strike the eye, but it never relaxes for an instant. The ultimate effect of this pressure of the unwieldy bureaucratic state apparatus is that a number of our functionaries, both at the center and in the localities, often involuntarily and quite unconsciously, deviate from inter-party democracy, from the line which they believe to be correct, but which they are often unable to carry out completely. You can well visualize it, the bureaucratic state apparatus with not less than 1 million employees, largely elements alien to the party, and our party apparatus with not more than 30,000 people, who are called upon to bring the state apparatus under the party's sway and make it a socialist apparatus. What would our state apparatus be worth without the support of the party? Without the assistance and support of our party apparatus, it would not be worth much, unfortunately. And every time our party apparatus extends its feelers into the various branches of the state administration, it is quite often obliged to adapt party activities to those of the state apparatus. Concretely, the party has to carry on work for the political education of the working class, to heighten the latter's political understanding, but at the same time there is the tax in kind to be collected, some campaign or other that has to be carried out, for without these campaigns, Without the assistance of the party, the state apparatus cannot cope with its duties. And here our party functionaries find themselves between two fires. They must rectify the line of the state apparatus, which still works according to old patterns, and at the same time they must retain contact with the workers. And often enough they themselves become bureaucratized. Such is the second obstacle, which is a difficult one to surmount, but which must be surmounted at all costs to facilitate the implementation of inter-party democracy. Lastly, there is yet a third obstacle in the way of realizing democracy. It is the low cultural level of a number of our organizations, of our units, particularly in the border regions, no offense to them meant, which hampers our party organizations in fully implementing inter-party democracy. You know that democracy requires a certain minimum of cultural development on the part of the members of the unit, and of the organization as a whole. It requires a certain minimum of active members who can be elected and placed in executive posts. And if there is no such minimum of active members in the organization, if the cultural level of the organization itself is low, what then? Naturally, in that case we are obliged to deviate from democracy, resorting to appointment of officials and so on. Such are the obstacles that have confronted us, which will continue to confront us, and which we must overcome if inter-party democracy is to be implemented sincerely and completely. I have reminded you of the obstacles that confront us, and of the external and internal conditions without which democracy becomes an empty, demagogic phrase, because some comrades make a fetish, an absolute, of the question of democracy. They believe that democracy is possible always, under all conditions, and that its implementation is prevented only by the evil will of the apparatus men. It is to oppose this idealistic view, a view that is not ours, not Marxist, not Leninist, that I have reminded you, comrades, of the conditions necessary for the implementation of democracy, and of the obstacles confronting us at the present time. Comrades, I could conclude my report with this, but I consider that it is our duty to sum up the discussion and to draw from this summing up certain conclusions which may prove of great importance for us. I could divide our whole struggle in the field of the discussion, on the question of democracy, into 3 periods. The first period, when the opposition attacked the CC, with the accusation that in these past 2 years, in fact throughout the NEP period, the whole line of the CC has been wrong. This was the period prior to the publication of the Political Bureau and CCC Presidium resolution. I shall not deal here with the question of who was right and who wrong. The attacks were violent ones, and as you know, not always warranted. But one thing is clear, this period can be described as one in which the opposition leveled its bitterest attacks on the CC. The second period began with the publication of the Political Bureau and CCC resolution, when the opposition was faced with the necessity of advancing something comprehensive and concrete against the CC resolution, and when it was found that the opposition had nothing either comprehensive or concrete to offer. That was a period in which the CC and the opposition came closest together. To all appearances the whole thing was coming to an end, or could have come to an end, through some reconciliation of the opposition to the CC line. I well remember a meeting in Moscow, the center of the discussion struggle. I believe it was on December 12 in the Hall of Columns, when Preobrazhensky submitted a resolution which for some reason was rejected, but which had little to distinguish it from the CC resolution. In fundamentals, and even in certain minor points, it did not differ at all from the CC resolution. And at that time it seemed to me that, properly speaking, there was nothing to continue fighting over. We had the CC resolution, which satisfied everyone, at least as regards 9/10 of it. The opposition itself evidently realized this and was prepared to meet us halfway, and with this, perhaps, we would put an end to the disagreements. This was the second, reconciliation period. But then came the third period. It opened with Trotsky's pronouncement, his appeal to the districts, which, at one stroke, wiped out the reconciliation tendencies and turned everything topsy-turvy. Trotsky's pronouncement opened a period of most violent inter-party struggle, a struggle which would not have occurred had Trotsky not come out with his letter on the very next day after he had voted for the Political Bureau resolution. You know that this first pronouncement of Trotsky's was followed by a second, and the second by a third, with the result that the struggle grew still more acute. I think, comrades, that in these pronouncements Trotsky committed at least 6 grave errors. These errors aggravated the inner-party struggle. I shall proceed to analyze them. Trotsky's first error lies in the very fact that he came out with an article on the next day after the publication of the CC Political Bureau and CCC resolution, with an article which can only be regarded as a platform advanced in opposition to the CC resolution. I repeat and emphasize that this article can only be regarded as a new platform, advanced in opposition to the unanimously adopted CC resolution. Just think of it, comrades, on a certain date the Political Bureau and the Presidium of the CCC meet and discuss a resolution on inner-party democracy. The resolution is adopted unanimously, and only a day later, independently of the CC, disregarding its will and over its head, Trotsky's article is circulated to the districts. It is a new platform and raises anew the issues of the apparatus and the party, cadres and youth, factions and party unity, and so on and so forth, a platform immediately seized upon by the entire opposition and advanced as a counterblast to the CC resolution. This can only be regarded as opposing oneself to the Central Committee. It means that Trotsky puts himself in open and outright opposition to the entire CC. The party was confronted with the question, have we a CC as our directing body, or does it no longer exist? Is there a CC whose unanimous decisions are respected by its members, or is there only a Superman standing above the CC, a Superman for whom no laws are valid and who can permit himself to vote for the CC resolution today, and to put forward and publish a new platform in opposition to this resolution tomorrow? Comrades, we cannot demand that workers submit to party discipline if a CC member, openly, in the sight of all, ignores the Central Committee and its unanimously adopted decision. We cannot apply 2 disciplines, one for workers, the other for bigwigs. There must be a single discipline. Trotsky's error consists in the fact that he has set himself up in opposition to the CC and imagines himself to be a Superman standing above the CC, above its laws, above its decisions, thereby providing a certain section of the party with a pretext for working to undermine confidence in the CC. Some comrades have expressed dissatisfaction that Trotsky's anti-party action was treated as such in certain Pravda articles and in articles by individual members of the CC. To these comrades I must reply that no party could respect a CC which at this difficult time failed to uphold the party's dignity. When one of its members attempted to put himself above the entire CC, the CC would have committed moral suicide had it passed over this attempt of Trotsky's. Trotsky's second error is his ambiguous behavior during the whole period of the discussion. He has grossly ignored the will of the party, which wants to know what his real position is, and has diplomatically evaded answering the question put point blank by many organizations, for whom, in the final analysis, does Trotsky stand, for the CC or for the opposition? The discussion is not being conducted for evasions but in order that the whole truth may be placed frankly and honestly before the party, as Ilitch does and as every Bolshevik is obliged to do. We are told that Trotsky is seriously ill. Let us assume he is, but during his illness he has written 3 articles and 4 new chapters of the pamphlet which appeared today. Is it not clear that Trotsky could perfectly well write a few lines in reply to the question put to him by various organizations and state whether he is for the opposition or against the opposition? It need hardly be said that this ignoring of the will of a number of organizations was bound to aggravate the inner-party struggle. Trotsky's third error is that in his pronouncements he puts the party apparatus in opposition to the party and advances the slogan of combating the apparatus men. Bolshevism cannot accept such contrasting of the party to the party apparatus. What, actually, does our party apparatus consist of? It consists of the Central Committee, the regional committees, the gubernial committees, the UISD committees. Are these subordinated to the party? Of course they are, for to the extent of 90% they are elected by the party. Those who say that the Gubernia committees have been appointed are wrong. They are wrong, because, as you know, comrades, our Gubernia committees are elected, just as the UISD committees and the CC are. They are subordinated to the party. But once elected, they must direct the work, that is the point. Is party work conceivable without direction from the Central Committee, after its election by the Congress, and from the Gubernia Committee, after its election by the Gubernia Conference? Surely, party work is inconceivable without this. Surely, this is an irresponsible anarcho-Menshevik view which renounces the very principle of direction of party activities. I am afraid that by contrasting the party apparatus to the party, Trotsky, whom, of course, I have no intention of putting on a par with the Mensheviks, impels some of the inexperienced elements in our party towards the standpoint of anarcho-Menshevik indiscipline and organizational laxity. I am afraid that this error of Trotsky's may expose our entire party apparatus, the apparatus without which the party is inconceivable, to attack by the inexperienced members of the party. Trotsky's fourth error consists in the fact that he has put the young members of the party in opposition to its cadres, that he has unwarrantedly accused our cadres of degeneration. Trotsky put our party on a par with the Social Democratic Party in Germany. He referred to examples how certain disciples of Marx, veteran Social Democrats, had degenerated, and from this he concluded that the same danger of degeneration faces our party cadres. Properly speaking, one might well laugh at the sight of a CC member who only yesterday fought Bolshevism hand in hand with the opportunists and Mensheviks, attempting now, in this seventh year of Soviet power, to assert, even if only as an assumption, that our party cadres, born, trained and steeled in the struggle against Menshevism and opportunism, that these cadres are faced with the prospect of degeneration. I repeat, one might well laugh at this attempt. Since, however, this assertion was made at no ordinary time but during a discussion, and since we are confronted here with a certain contrasting of the party cadres, who are all edged to be susceptible to degeneration, to the young party members, who are all edged to be free, or almost free, of such a danger, this assumption, though essentially ridiculous and frivolous, may acquire, and already has acquired, a definite practical significance. That is why I think we must stop to look into it. It is sometimes said that old people must be respected, for they have lived longer than the young, know more and can give better advice. I must say, comrades, that this is an absolutely erroneous view. It is not every old person we must respect, and it is not every experience that is of value to us. What matters is the kind of experience. German social democracy has its cadres, very experienced ones too, Sedman, Nosk, Wells and the rest, men with the greatest experience, men who know all the ins and outs of the struggle. But struggle against what, and against whom? What matters is the kind of experience. In Germany these cadres were trained in the struggle against the revolutionary spirit, not in the struggle for the dictatorship of the proletariat, but against it. Their experience is vast, but it is the wrong kind of experience. Comrades, it is the duty of the youth to explode this experience, demolish it and oust these old ones. There, in German social democracy, the youth, being free of the experience of struggle against the revolutionary spirit, is closer to this revolutionary spirit or closer to Marxism, than the old cadres. The latter are burdened with the experience of struggle against the revolutionary spirit of the proletariat, they are burdened with the experience or struggle for opportunism, against revolutionism. Such cadres must be rooted, and all our sympathies must be with that youth which, I repeat, is free of this experience of struggle against the revolutionary spirit and for that reason can the more easily assimilate the new ways and methods of struggle for the dictatorship of the proletariat, against opportunism. There, in Germany, I can understand the question being put in that way. If Trotsky were speaking of German social democracy and the cadres of such a party, I would be wholeheartedly prepared to endorse his statement. But we are dealing with a different party, the Communist Party, the Bolshevik Party, whose cadres came into being in the struggle against opportunism, gained strength in that struggle, and which matured and captured power in the struggle against imperialism, in the struggle against all the opportunist hangers on of imperialism. Is it not clear that there is a fundamental difference here? Our cadres matured in the struggle to assert the revolutionary spirit, they carried that struggle through to the end, they came to power in battles against imperialism, and they are now shaking the foundations of world imperialism. How can these cadres, if one approaches the matter honestly, without duplicity, how can these cadres be put on a par with those of German social democracy, which in the past worked hand in glove with Wilhelm against the working class, and is now working hand in glove with Siecht, a party which grew up and was formed in the struggle against the revolutionary spirit of the proletariat? How can these cadres, fundamentally different in nature, be put on a par? How can they be confused? Is it so difficult to realize that the gulf between the two is unbridgeable? Is it so difficult to see that Trotsky's gross misrepresentation, his gross confusion, are calculated to undermine the prestige of our revolutionary cadres, the core of our party? Is it not clear that this misrepresentation could only inflame passions and render the inner party struggle more acute? Trotsky's fifth error is to raise in his letters the argument and slogan that the party must march in step with the student youth, our party's truest barometer. The youth, the party's truest barometer, react most sharply of all against party bureaucracy, he says in his first article. And in order that there be no doubt as to what youth he has in mind, Trotsky adds in his second letter, especially sharply, as we have seen, does the student youth react against bureaucracy. If we were to proceed from this proposition, an absolutely incorrect one, theoretically fallacious and practically harmful, we should have to go further and issue the slogan, "More student youth in our party, open wide the doors of our party to the student youth." Hitherto the policy has been to orientate ourselves on the proletarian section of our party, and we have said, open wide the doors of the party to proletarian elements. Our party must grow by recruiting proletarians. Now Trotsky turns this formula upside down. The question of intellectuals and workers in our party is no new one. It was raised as far back as the Second Congress of our party, when it was a question of the formulation of paragraph 1 of the rules on party membership. As you know, Martov demanded at the time that the framework of the party be expanded to include non-proletarian elements, in opposition to Comrade Lenin, who insisted that the admission of such elements into the party be strictly limited. Subsequently, at the Third Congress of our party, the issue rose again, with new force. I recall how sharply, at that Congress, Comrade Lenin put the question of workers and intellectuals in our party. This is what Comrade Lenin said at the time. It has been pointed out that usually splits have been headed by intellectuals. This is a very important point, but it is not decisive. I believe we must take a broader view of the matter. The bringing of workers onto the committees is not only a pedagogical, but also a political task. Workers have class instinct, and given a little political experience they fairly soon develop into staunch social democrats. I would be very much in sympathy with the idea that our committees should contain 8 workers to every 2 intellectuals, see Volume 7, p. 282. That is how the question stood as early as 1905. Ever since, this injunction of Comrade Lenin's has been our guiding principle in building the party. But now Trotsky proposes, in effect, that we break with the organizational line of Bolshevism. And, finally, Trotsky's sixth error lies in his proclaiming freedom of groups. Yes, freedom of groups. I recall that already in the subcommission which drew up the draft resolution on democracy we had an argument with Trotsky on groups and factions. Trotsky raised no objection to the prohibition of factions, but vehemently defended the idea of permitting groups within the party. That view is shared by the opposition. Evidently, these people do not realize that by permitting freedom of groups they open a loophole for the Myasnikov elements, and make it easier for them to mislead the party and represent factions as groups. Indeed, is there any difference between a group and a faction? only an outward one. This is how Comrade Lenin defines factionalism, identifying it with groups. Even before the general party discussion on the trade unions, certain signs of factionalism were apparent in the party, namely, the formation of groups with separate platforms, striving to a certain degree to segregate themselves and to establish a group discipline of their own. See Stenographic Report of the 10th Congress, R.C.P. p. 309. As you see, there is essentially no difference here between factions and groups. And when the opposition set up its own bureau here in Moscow, with Serebryakov as its head, when it began to send out speakers with instructions to address such and such meetings and raise such and such objections, and when, in the course of the struggle, these oppositionists were compelled to retreat and change their resolutions by command, this, of course, was evidence of the existence of a group and of group discipline. But we are told that this was not a faction. Well, let Preobrazhensky explain what a faction is. Trotsky's pronouncements, his letters and articles on the subject of generations and of factions, are designed to induce the party to tolerate groups within its midst. This is an attempt to legalize factions, and Trotsky's faction above all. Trotsky affirms that groups arise because of the bureaucratic regime instituted by the Central Committee, and that if there were no bureaucratic regime, there would be no groups either. This is an un-Marxist approach, comrades. Groups arise, and will continue to arise, because we have in our country the most diverse forms of economy, from embryonic forms of socialism down to medievalism. That in the first place. Then we have the NEP, that is, we have allowed capitalism, the revival of private capital and the revival of the ideas that go with it, and these ideas are penetrating into the party. That in the second place. And, in the third place, our party is made up of three component parts. There are workers, peasants and intellectuals in its ranks. These then, if we approach the question in a Marxist way, are the causes why certain elements are drawn from the party for the formation of groups, which in some cases we must remove by surgical action, and in others dissolve by ideological means, through discussion. It is not a question of regime here. There would be many more groups under a regime of maximum freedom. So it is not the regime that is to blame, but the conditions in which we live, the conditions that exist in our country, the conditions governing the development of the party itself. If we were to allow groups in this situation, under these complex conditions, we would ruin the party, convert it from the monolithic, united organization that it is into a union of groups and factions contracting with one another and entering into temporary alliances and agreements. That would not be a party. It would be the collapse of the party. Never, for a single moment, have the Bolsheviks conceived of the party as anything but a monolithic organization, hewed from a single block, possessing a single will and in its work uniting all shades of thought into a single current of practical activities. But what Trotsky suggests is profoundly erroneous. It runs counter to Bolshevik organizational principles, and would inevitably lead to the disintegration of the party, making it lax and soft, converting it from a united party into a federation of groups. Living as we do in a situation of capitalist encirclement, we need not only a united party, not only a solid party, but a veritable party of steel, one capable of withstanding the assault of the enemies of the proletariat, capable of leading the workers to the final battle. What are the conclusions? The first conclusion is that we have produced a concrete, clear-cut resolution summing up the present discussion. We have declared, groups and factions cannot be tolerated, the party must be united, monolithic, the party must not be put in opposition to the apparatus, there must be no idle talk of our cadres being in danger of degeneration, for they are revolutionary cadres, there must be no searching for cleavages between these revolutionary cadres and their youth, which is marching in step with these cadres and will continue to do so in future. There are also certain positive conclusions. The first and fundamental one is that henceforth the party must resolutely orientate itself on, and take as its criterion, the proletarian section of our party, that it must narrow and reduce, or eliminate altogether, the possibility of entry of non-proletarian elements, and opened the doors wider to proletarian elements. As for groups and factions, I believe that the time has come when we must make public the clause in the Unity Resolution which on Comrade Lenin's proposal was adopted by the 10th Congress of our party and was not intended for publication. Party members have forgotten about this clause. I am afraid not everyone remembers it. This clause, which has hitherto remained secret, should now be published and incorporated in the resolution which we shall adopt on the results of the discussion. With your permission I shall read it. Here is what it says. In order to ensure strict discipline within the party and in all Soviet work and to secure maximum unanimity, doing away with all factionalism, the Congress authorizes the Central Committee, in cases of breach of discipline or of a revival or toleration of factionalism, to apply all party penalties, up to and including expulsion from the party and, in regard to members of the Central Committee, to reduce them to the status of candidate members and even, as an extreme measure, to expel them from the party. A condition for the application of such an extreme measure, to members and candidate members of the CC and members of the Control Commission, must be the convocation of a plenum of the Central Committee, to which all candidate members of the Central Committee and all members of the Control Commission shall be invited. If such a General Assembly of the most responsible leaders of the party, by a 2/3 majority, considers it necessary to reduce a member of the Central Committee to the status of a candidate member, or to expel him from the party, this measure shall be put into effect immediately. I think that we must incorporate this clause in the resolution on the results of the discussion, and make it public. Lastly, a question which the opposition keeps raising and to which, apparently, they do not always receive a satisfactory reply. The opposition often asks, whose sentiments do we, the opposition, express? I believe that the opposition expresses the sentiments of the non-proletarian section of our party. I believe that the opposition, perhaps unconsciously and involuntarily, serves as the unwitting vehicle of the sentiments of the non-proletarian elements in our party. I believe that the opposition, in its unrestrained agitation for democracy, which it so often makes into an absolute and a fetish, is unleashing petty bourgeois elemental forces. Are you acquainted with the sentiments or such comrades as the students Martinov, Kazarian and the rest? Have you read Khodorkovsky's article in Pravda which cites passages from the speeches of these comrades? Here, for instance, is a speech by Martinov. He is a party member. It appears, it is our business to make decisions, and the business of the CC to carry them out and to indulge less in argument. This refers to a party unit in a college of the People's Commissariat of Transport. But, comrades, the party has a total of at least 50,000 units, and if each of them is going to regard the CC in this way, holding that it is the business of the units to decide, and of the CC not to argue, I am afraid that we shall never arrive at any decision. Whence comes this sentiment of the Martinovs? What is the proletarian about it? And the Martinovs, mind you, support the opposition. Is there any difference between Martinov and Trotsky? Only in the fact that Trotsky launched the attack on the party apparatus, while Martinov is driving that attack home. And here is another college student, Kazarian, who, it appears, is also a party member. What have we got, he demands, a dictatorship of the proletariat or a dictatorship of the Communist Party over the proletariat? This, comrades, comes not from the Menshevik Martov but from the communist Kazarian. The difference between Trotsky and Kazarian is that according to Trotsky our cadres are degenerating, but according to Kazarian they should be driven out, for in his opinion they have saddled themselves on the proletariat. I ask, whose sentiments do the Martinovs and Kazarians express? Proletarian sentiments? Certainly not. Whose then? The sentiments of the non-proletarian elements in the party and in the country. And is it an accident that these exponents of non-proletarian sentiments vote for the opposition? No, it is no accident. Applause. 2. Reply to the discussion. January 18th. I said in my report that I did not wish to touch on the history of the question because that would introduce an element of squabbling, as I put it, and mutual recrimination. But since Preobrazhensky wishes it, since he insists, I am prepared to comply and say a few words on the history of the question of inner-party democracy. How did the question of inner-party democracy arise in the CC? It came up for the first time at the CC plenum in September, in connection with the conflicts that had developed in the factories and the fact, then brought out by us, that certain party and trade union organizations had become isolated from the masses. The CC took the view that this was a serious matter, that shortcomings had accumulated in the party and that a special authoritative commission ought to be set up to look into the matter, study the facts and submit concrete proposals on how to improve the situation in the party. The same thing applies to the marketing crisis, the price scissors. The opposition took no part at all in raising those questions or in electing the commissions on the inner party situation and on the scissors problem. Where was the opposition at the time? If I am not mistaken, Preobrazhensky was then in the Crimea and Supranov in Kislovodsk. Trotsky, then in Kislovodsk, was finishing his articles on art and was about to return to Moscow. They had not yet returned when the Central Committee raised this question at its meeting. They came back to find a ready decision and did not intervene with a single word, nor did they raise a single objection to the CC plan. The situation in the party was the subject of a report read by Comrade Zazinski at a conference of Gubernia Committee secretaries in September. I affirm that neither at the September plenum, nor at the Secretaries' Conference, did the present members of the opposition so much as hint by a single word at a severe economic crisis, or a crisis in the party, or the democracy issue. So you see that the questions of democracy and of the scissors were raised by the Central Committee itself. The initiative was entirely in the hands of the CC, while the members of the opposition remained silent. They were absent. That, so to speak, was Act 1, the initial stage in the history of the issue. Act 2 began with the plenum of the CC and CCC in October. The opposition, headed by Trotsky, seeing that the question of shortcomings in the party was in the air, that the CC had already taken the matter in hand and had formed commissions, and lest, God forbid, the initiative would remain with the CC, took as its aim, to wrest the initiative from the CC and get astride the hobby horse of democracy. As you know, it is a spry sort of horse and could be used in an attempt to outride the CC, and so there appeared the documents on which Preobrazhensky spoke here at such length, the document of the 463 and Trotsky's letter. That same Trotsky, who in September, a few days before his factional pronouncement, had been silent at the plenum, at any rate had not objected to the CC decisions, 2 weeks later suddenly discovered that the country and the party were going to rack and ruin and that he, Trotsky, this patriarch of bureaucrats, could not live without democracy. It was rather amusing for us to hear Trotsky hold forth on the subject of democracy. The same Trotsky who at the 10th Party Congress had demanded that the trade unions be shaken up from above. But we knew that no great difference separates the Trotsky of the 10th Congress period from the Trotsky of today, for now, as then, he advocates shaking up the Leninist cadres. The only difference is that at the 10th Congress he wanted to shake up the Leninist cadres from the top, in the sphere of the trade unions, whereas now he wants to shake up the same Leninist cadres from the bottom, in the sphere of the party. He needs democracy as a hobby horse, as a strategic maneuver. That's what all the clamor is about. For, if the opposition really wanted to help matters, to approach the issue in a businesslike and comradely way, it should have submitted its statement first of all to the commissions set up by the September plenum, and should have said something like this: "We consider your work unsatisfactory, we demand a report on its results to the Political Bureau, we demand a plenum of the CC, to which we have new proposals of ours to present, etc." And if the commissions had refused to give them a hearing, or if the Political Bureau had refused to hear their case, if it had ignored the opinion of the opposition, or refused to call a plenum to examine Trotsky's proposals and the opposition proposals generally, then, and only then, Would the opposition have been fully justified in coming out openly, over the head of the CC, with an appeal to the party membership and in saying to the party, the country is facing disaster, economic crisis is developing, the party is on the road to ruin? We asked the CC commissions to go into these questions, but they refused to give us a hearing. We tried to lay the matter before the political bureau, but nothing came of that either. We are now forced to appeal to the party, in order that the party itself may take things in hand. I do not doubt that the response of the party would have been, yes, these are practical revolutionaries, for they place the essence of the matter above the form. But did the opposition act like that? Did it attempt, even once, to approach the CC commissions with its proposals? Did it ever think of, did it make any attempt at, raising and settling the issues within the CC or the organs of the CC? No, the opposition made no such attempt. Evidently, its purpose was not to improve the inner party situation, or to help the party to improve the economic situation, but to anticipate the work of the commissions and plenum of the CC, to wrest the initiative from the CC, get astride the hobby horse of democracy and, while there was still time, raise a hue and cry in an attempt to undermine confidence in the CC. Clearly, the opposition was in a hurry to concoct documents against the CC, in the shape of Trotsky's letter and the statement of the 46, so that it could circulate them among the Sverdlov University students and to the districts and assert that it, the opposition, was for democracy and for improving the economic situation, while the CC was hindering, that assistance was needed against the CC, and so on. Such are the facts. I demand that Preobrazhensky refute these statements of mine. I demand that he refute them, in the press at least. Let Preobrazhensky try to refute the fact that the commissions were set up in September by the CC plenum without the opposition, before the opposition took up the issue. Let Preobrazhensky try to refute the fact that neither Trotsky nor the other oppositionists attempted to present their proposals to the commissions. Let Preobrazhensky try to refute the fact that the opposition knew of the existence of these commissions, ignored their work and made no effort to settle the matter within the CC. That is why, when Preobrazhensky and Trotsky declared at the October plenum that they wanted to save the party through democracy, but that the CC was blind and saw nothing, the CC laughed at them and replied, "No, comrades, we, the CC, are wholeheartedly for democracy, but we do not believe in your democracy, because we feel that your democracy is simply a strategic move against the CC motivated by your factionalism." What did the CC and CCC plenums decide at the time on inner-party democracy? This is what they decided. The plenums fully endorsed the Political Bureau's timely course of promoting inner-party democracy and also its proposal to intensify the struggle against extravagance and the corrupting influence of the NEP on some elements in the party. The plenums instruct the Political Bureau to do everything necessary to expedite the work of the commissions appointed by the Political Bureau and the September plenum. 1. The Commission on the Scissors, 2. On Wages, 3. On the inner party situation. When the necessary measures on these questions have been worked out, the Political Bureau must immediately begin to put them into effect and report to the next plenum of the CC. In one of his letters to the CC, Trotsky wrote that the October plenum was the supreme expression of the apparatus' bureaucratic line of policy. Is it not clear that this statement of Trotsky's is a slander against the CC? Only a man who has completely lost his head and is blinded by factionalism can, after the adoption of the document I have just read, maintain that the October plenum was the supreme expression of bureaucracy. And what did the CC and CCC plenums decide at the time on the democratic maneuvers of Trotsky and the 46? This is what they decided. The plenums of the CC and CCC, attended also by representatives of 10 party organizations, regard Trotsky's pronouncement, made at the present highly important moment for the world revolution and the party, as a grave political error, especially because his attack on the Political Bureau has, objectively, assumed the character of a factional move which threatens to strike a blow at party unity and creates a crisis in the party. The plenums note with regret that, In order to raise the questions touched on by him, Trotsky chose the method of appealing to individual party members, instead of the only permissible method, that of first submitting these questions for discussion by the bodies of which Trotsky is a member. The method chosen by Trotsky served as the signal for the appearance of a factional group, statement of the 46. The plenums of the CC and CCC, and representatives of 10 party organizations, resolutely condemned the statement of the 46 as a factional and schismatic step, for that is its nature, whatever the intentions of those who signed it. That statement threatens to subject the entire party in the coming months to an inner-party struggle and thereby weaken the party at a supremely important moment for the destinies of the world revolution. As you see, comrades, these facts completely refute the picture of the situation presented here by Preobrazhensky. Act 3, or the third stage, in the history of the issue was the period following the October plenum. The October plenum had voted to instruct the political bureau that it take every measure to ensure harmony in its work. I must state here, comrades, that in the period following the October plenum we took every measure to work in harmony with Trotsky, although I must say that this proved anything but an easy task. We had 2 private conferences with Trotsky, went into all questions of economic and party matters and arrived at certain views on which there were no disagreements. As I reported yesterday, a subcommission of 3 was set up as a continuation of these private conferences and of these efforts to ensure harmony in the work of the political bureau. This subcommission drew up the draft resolution which subsequently became the CC and CCC resolution on democracy. That is how things stood. It seemed to us that after the unanimous adoption of the resolution there were no further grounds for controversy, no grounds for an inner-party struggle. And, indeed, this was so until Trotsky's new pronouncement, his appeal to the districts. But Trotsky's pronouncement on the day after the publication of the CC resolution, undertaken independently of the CC and over its head, upset everything, radically changed the situation, and hurled the party back into a fresh controversy and a fresh struggle, more acute than before. It is said that the CC should have forbidden the publication of Trotsky's article. That is wrong, comrades. It would have been a highly dangerous step for the CC to take. Try and prohibit an article of Trotsky's, already made public in the Moscow districts. The Central Committee could not take so rash a step. That is the history of the issue. It follows from what has been said that the opposition has been concerned not so much with democracy as with using the idea of democracy to undermine the CC, that in the case of the opposition we are dealing not with people who want to help the party, but with a faction which has been stealthily watching the CC in the hope that it may slip up, or overlook something, and then we'll pounce on it. For it is a faction when one group of party members tries to trap the central agencies of the party in order to exploit a crop failure, a depreciation of the chivernates or any other difficulty confronting the party, and then to attack the party unexpectedly, from ambush, and to hit it on the head. Yes, the CC was right when in October it said to you, comrades of the opposition, that democracy is one thing and intriguing against the party quite another. That democracy is one thing and exploiting clamor about democracy against the party majority quite another. That, Preobrazhensky, is the history of the issue, about which I did not want to speak here, but which, nevertheless, I have been obliged to recount in deference to your persistent desire. The opposition has made it a rule to extol Comrade Lenin as the greatest of geniuses. I am afraid that this praise is insincere and that behind it, too, is a crafty stratagem. The clamor about Comrade Lenin's genius is meant to cover up their departure from Lenin, and at the same time to emphasize the weakness of his disciples. Certainly, it is not for us, Comrade Lenin's disciples, to fail to appreciate that Comrade Lenin is the greatest of geniuses, and that men of his caliber are born once in many centuries. But permit me to ask you, Preobrazhensky, why did you differ with this greatest of geniuses on the issue of the Brest peace? Why did you abandon and refuse to heed this greatest of geniuses at a difficult moment? Where, in which camp, were you then? And Saprinov, who now insincerely and hypocritically lauds Comrade Lenin, that same Supranov who had the impudence, at one Congress, to call Comrade Lenin an ignoramus and oligarch. Why did he not support the genius Lenin, say at the 10th Congress, and why, if he really thinks that Comrade Lenin is the greatest of geniuses, has he invariably appeared in the opposite camp at difficult moments? Does Supranov know that Comrade Lenin, in submitting to the 10th Congress the Unity Resolution, which calls for the expulsion of factionalists from the party, had in mind Supranov among others? Or again, why was Preobrazhensky found to be in the camp of the opponents of the great genius Lenin, not only at the time of the Brest Peace, but subsequently too, in the period of the trade union discussion? Is all this accidental? Is there not a definite logic in it? Preobrazhensky, I tried to use my own brains. It is very praiseworthy, Preobrazhensky, that you should have wanted to use your own brains. But just look at the result. On the Brest issue you used your own brains, and came a cropper. Then in the trade union discussion you again tried to use your own brains, and again you came a cropper. And now, I do not know whether you are using your own brains or borrowing someone else's, but it appears that you have come a cropper this time too. Laughter. Nevertheless, I think that if Preobrazhensky were now to use his own brains more, rather than Trotsky's, which resulted in the letter of October 8 and 38212 he would be closer to us than to Trotsky. Preobrazhensky has reproached the CC, asserting that as long as Illich stood at our head questions were solved in good time, not belatedly, for Illich was able to discern new events in the embryo, and give slogans that anticipated events, whereas now, he claims, with Illich absent, the Central Committee has begun to lag behind events. What does Preobrazhensky wish to imply? That Illich is superior to his disciples? But does anyone doubt that? Does anyone doubt that, compared with his disciples, Illich stands out as a veritable Goliath? If we are to speak of the party's leader, not a press-publicized leader receiving a heap of congratulatory messages, but its real leader, then there is only one, Comrade Lenin. That is precisely why it has been stressed time and again that in the present circumstances, with Comrade Lenin temporarily absent, we must keep to the line of collective leadership. As for Comrade Lenin's disciples, we might point, for example, to the events connected with the Kertzen Ultimatum, 4 which were a regular test, an examination, for them. The fact that we emerged from our difficulties then without detriment to our cause undoubtedly shows that Comrade Lenin's disciples had already learned a thing or two from their teacher. Preobrazhensky is wrong in asserting that our party did not lag behind events in previous years. He is wrong because this assertion is untrue factually and incorrect theoretically. Several examples can be cited. Take, for instance, the Brest Peace. Were we not late in concluding it? And did it not require such facts as the German offensive and the wholesale flight of our soldiers to make us realize, at last, that we had to have peace? The disintegration of the front, Hoffmann's offensive, 5 his approach to Petrograd, the pressure exerted on us by the peasants, did it not take all these developments to make us realize that the tempo of the world revolution was not as rapid as we would have liked? That our army was not as strong as we had thought, that the peasantry was not as patient as some of us had thought, and that it wanted peace, and would achieve it by force. Or take the repeal of the surplus appropriation system. Were we not late in repealing the surplus appropriation system? Did it not require such developments as Kronstadt and Tambov 6 to make us understand that it was no longer possible to retain the conditions of war communism? Did not Illich himself admit that on this front we had sustained a more serious defeat than any we had suffered at the Denikin or Kolchak fronts? Was it accidental that in all these instances the party lagged behind events and acted somewhat belatedly? No, it was not accidental. There was a natural law at work here. Evidently, insofar as it is a matter not of general theoretical predictions, but of direct practical leadership, the ruling party, standing at the helm and involved in the events of the day, cannot immediately perceive and grasp processes taking place below the surface of life. It requires some impulse from outside and a definite degree of development of the new processes for the party to perceive them and orientate its work accordingly. For that very reason our party lagged somewhat behind events in the past, and will lag behind them in future too. But the point here does not at all concern lagging behind, but understanding the significance of events, the significance of new processes, and then skillfully directing them in accordance with the general trend of development. That is how the matter stands if we approach things as Marxists and not as factionalists who go about searching everywhere for culprits. Preobrazhensky is indignant that representatives of the CC speak of Trotsky's deviations from Leninism. He is indignant, but has presented no arguments to the contrary and has made no attempt at all to substantiate his indignation, forgetting that indignation is no argument. Yes, it is true that Trotsky deviates from Leninism on questions of organization. That has been, and still is, our contention. The articles in Pravda entitled Down with Factionalism, written by Bukharin, are entirely devoted to Trotsky's deviations from Leninism. Why has not Preobrazhensky challenged the basic ideas of these articles? Why has he not tried to support his indignation by arguments, or a semblance of arguments? I said yesterday, and I must repeat it today, that such actions of Trotsky's as setting himself up in opposition to the Central Committee, ignoring the will of a number of organizations that are demanding a clear answer from him, contrasting the party to the party apparatus, and the young party members to the party cadres, his attempt to orientate the party on the student youth, and his proclamation of freedom of groups, I say that these actions are incompatible with the organizational principles of Leninism. Why then has Preobrazhensky not tried to refute this statement of mine? It is said that Trotsky is being baited. Preobrazhensky and Radke have spoken of this. Comrades, I must say that the statements of these comrades about baiting are altogether at variance with the facts. Let me recall two facts so that you may be able to judge for yourselves. First, the incident which occurred at the September plenum of the CC when, in reply to the remark by CC member Komrov that CC members cannot refuse to carry out CC decisions, Trotsky jumped up and left the meeting. You will recall that the CC plenum sent a delegation to Trotsky with the request that he return to the meeting. You will recall that Trotsky refused to comply with this request of the plenum, thereby demonstrating that he had not the slightest respect for his Central Committee. There is also the other fact, that Trotsky definitely refuses to work in the Central Soviet bodies, in the Council of Labor and Defense and the Council of People's Commissars, despite the twice adopted CC decision that he at last take up his duties in the Soviet bodies. You know that Trotsky has not as much as moved a finger to carry out the CC decision. But, indeed, why should not Trotsky work in the Council of Labor and Defense, or in the Council of People's Commissars? Why should not Trotsky, who is so fond of talking about planning, why should he not have a look into our State Planning Commission? Is it right and proper for a CC member to ignore a decision of the CC? Do not all these facts show that the talk about baiting is no more than idle gossip, and that if anyone is to be blamed, it is Trotsky himself, for his behavior can only be regarded as mocking at the CC. Preobrazhensky's arguments about democracy are entirely wrong. This is how he puts the question: either we have groups, and in that case there is democracy, or you prohibit groups, and in that case there is no democracy. In his conception, freedom of groups and democracy are inseparably bound up. That is not how we understand democracy. We understand democracy to mean raising the activity and political understanding of the mass of party members. We understand it to mean the systematic enlistment of the party membership not only in the discussion of questions, but also in the leadership of the work. Freedom of groups, that is, freedom of factions, they are one and the same thing, represents an evil which threatens to splinter the party and turn it into a discussion club. You have exposed yourself, Preobrazhensky, by defending freedom of factions. The mass of party members understand democracy to mean creating conditions that will ensure active participation of the party members in the leadership of our country, whereas a couple of oppositionist intellectuals understand it to mean that the opposition must be given freedom to form a faction. You stand exposed, Preobrazhensky. And why are you so frightened by point 7, on party unity? What is there to be frightened about? Point 7 reads, in order to ensure strict discipline within the party and in all Soviet work and to secure maximum unanimity, doing away with all factionalism. But are you against strict discipline within the party and in Soviet work? Comrades of the opposition, are you against all this? Well, I did not know, comrades, that you were opposed to this. Are you, Sopranov and Preobrazhensky, opposed to securing maximum unanimity and doing away with factionalism? Tell us frankly, and perhaps we shall introduce an amendment or two. Laughter. Further, the Congress authorizes the Central Committee, in case of breach of party discipline or of a revival of factionalism, to apply party penalties. Are you afraid of this too? Can it be that you, Preobrazhensky, Radke, Sopranov, are thinking of violating party discipline, of reviving factionalism? Well, if that is not your intention, then what are you afraid of? Your panic shows you up, comrades. Evidently, if you are afraid of point 7 of the Unity Resolution, you must be for factionalism, for violating discipline, and against unity. Otherwise, why all the panic? If your conscience is clear, if you are for unity and against factionalism and violation of discipline, then is it not clear that the punishing hand of the party will not touch you? What is there to fear then? Voice. But why do you include the point, if there is nothing to fear? To remind you. Laughter, applause. Preobrazhensky, you are intimidating the party. We are intimidating the factionalists, not the party. Do you really think, Preobrazhensky, that the party and the factionalists are identical? Apparently it is a case of the cap fitting. Laughter. Further, and, in regard to members of the Central Committee, to reduce them to the status of candidate members and even, as an extreme measure, to expel them from the party. A condition for the application of such an extreme measure to members and candidate members of the CC and members of the Central Control Commission must be the convocation of a plenum of the Central Committee. What is there terrible in that? If you are not factionalists, if you are against freedom of groups, and if you are for unity, then you, comrades of the opposition, should vote for point 7 of the 10th Congress resolution, for it is directed solely against factionalists, solely against those who violate the party's unity, its strength and discipline. Is that not clear? I now pass to Radke. There are people who can master and manage their tongues, these are ordinary people. There are also people who are slaves of their tongues manage them. These are peculiar people. And it is to this category of peculiar people that Radke belongs. A man who has a tongue he cannot manage and who is the slave of his own tongue, can never know what and when his tongue is liable to blurt out. If you had been able to hear Radke's speeches at the various meetings, you would have been astonished by what he said today. At one discussion meeting Radke asserted that the question of inner-party democracy was a trivial one, that actually he, Radke, was against democracy, that, at bottom the issue now was not one of democracy, but of what the CC intended to do with Trotsky. At another discussion meeting this same Radke declared that democracy within the party was not a serious matter, but that democracy within the CC was a matter of the utmost importance, for in his opinion a directory had been set up inside the CC, and today this same Radke tells us in all innocence that inner-party democracy is as indispensable as air and water, for without democracy, it appears, leadership of the party is impossible. Which of these three Radkes are we to believe, the first, second or third? And what guarantee is there that Radke, or rather his tongue, will not in the immediate future make new unexpected statements that refute all his previous ones? Can one rely on a man like Radke? Can one, after all this, attach any value to Radke's statement, for instance, about Boguslavsky and Antonov being removed from certain posts out of factional considerations? I have already spoken, comrades, about Boguslavsky. As for Antonov Ovsienko, permit me to report the following. Antonov was removed from the political department of the Red Army by decision of the Organizing Bureau of the Central Committee, a decision confirmed by a plenum of the Central Committee. He was removed, first of all, for having issued a circular about a conference of party units in military colleges and the air fleet, with the international situation, party affairs, etc., as items on the agenda, without the knowledge and agreement of the CC. Although Antonov knew that the status of the political department of the Red Army is that of a department of the CC, he was removed from the political department, in addition, for having sent to all party units of the army a circular concerning the forms in which inter-party democracy was to be applied, doing so against the will of the CC and in spite of its warning that the circular must be coordinated with the plans of the CC. He was removed, lastly, for having sent to the CC and CCC a letter, altogether indecent in tone and absolutely impermissible in content, threatening the CC and CCC that the overweening leaders would be called to account. Comrades, oppositionists can and should be allowed to hold posts. Heads of CC departments can and should be allowed to criticize the Central Committee's activities. But we cannot allow the head of the political department of the Red Army, which has the status of a department of the CC, systematically to refuse to establish working contact with his Central Committee. We cannot allow a responsible official to trample underfoot the elementary rules of decency. Such a comrade cannot be entrusted with the education of the Red Army. That is how matters stand with Antonov. Finally, I must say a few words on the subject of whose are the sentiments that are expressed in the pronouncements of the comrades of the opposition. I must return to the incident of comrades Kazarian and Martinov, students at the People's Commissariat of Transport College. This incident is evidence that all is not well among a certain section of our students, that what they had of the party spirit in them has already become rotten, that intrinsically they have already broken with the party and precisely for that reason willingly vote for the opposition. You will forgive me, comrades, but such people, rotten through and through from the party standpoint, are not to be found, and could not possibly be found, among those who voted for the CC resolution. There are no such people on our side, comrades. There are none in our ranks who would ask, what have we got, a dictatorship of the proletariat or a dictatorship of the Communist Party over the proletariat? That is a phrase of Marta van Dan, it is a phrase of the Socialist Revolutionary Dni, 7, and if among you, in your ranks, there are those who take this line, then what is your position worth, comrades of the opposition? Or there is, for instance, the other comrade, Comrade Martinov, who thinks that the CC should keep quiet while the party units decide. He says in effect, you, the CC, can carry out what we, the units, decide. But we have 50,000 party units, and if they are going to decide, say, the question of the Kurzen ultimatum, then we shall not arrive at a decision in 2 years. That is indeed anarcho-Menshevism of the first water. These people have lost their heads. From the party standpoint they are rotten through and through, and if you have them in your faction, then I ask you, what is this faction of yours worth? Voice, are they party members? Yes, unfortunately they are, but I am prepared to take every measure to ensure that such people cease to be members of our party. Applause. I have said that the opposition voices the sentiments and aspirations of the non-proletarian elements in the party and outside it. Without being conscious of it, the opposition is unleashing petty bourgeois elemental forces. Its factional activities bring grist to the mill of the enemies of our party, to the mill of those who want to weaken, to overthrow the dictatorship of the proletariat. I said this yesterday and I reaffirm it today. But perhaps you would like to hear other, fresh witnesses? I can give you that pleasure. Let me cite, for instance, the evidence of S. Ivanovich, a name you have all heard. Who is this S. Ivanovich? He is a Menshevik, a former party member, of the days when we and the Mensheviks comprised a single party. Later on he disagreed with the Menshevik CC and became a right-wing Menshevik. The right-wing Mensheviks are a group of Menshevik interventionists, and their immediate object is to overthrow Soviet power, even if with the aid of foreign bayonets. Their organ is Zarya 8 and its editor is S. Ivanovich. How does he regard our opposition, this right-wing Menshevik? What sort of testimonial has he given it? Listen to this. Let us be thankful to the opposition for having so luridly depicted that horrifying moral cesspool that goes by the name of the R.C.P. Let us be thankful to it for having dealt a serious blow, morally and organizationally, to the R.C.P. Let us be thankful to it for its activities, because they help all those who regard the overthrow of Soviet power as the task of the socialist parties. There you have your testimonial, comrades of the opposition. In conclusion, I would like nevertheless to wish the comrades of the opposition that this kiss of S. Ivanovich will not stick to them too closely. Prolonged applause.